Hi.
Greetings. In our last segment, the first segment of Weaners, Workers, and Wise Guys, we made the point that there's an analogy in the New Testament about how mature you are in terms of your understanding, and that analogy is about milk and meat. So the Weaners idea, you may have thought that was a misspelling in our description last time, but no, it wasn't, because the concept is that in the New Testament, in the two passages we looked at last time, which were First Peter and Hebrews, the concept is that we should crave the pure milk that belongs to the Word. And then in Hebrews, you have the negative side of that, which is that although you should be teachers in view of the time, you have become such as need milk and not solid food.
Yeah.
So we can stay in that state forever.
Yeah.
And the modern church, unfortunately, makes it easy,
Yeah.
as cults do, to stay in the milk stage forever. And then you realize that, at least in cults, the milk is also contaminated.
Mm-hmm.
So following up on that idea, we're in part 2 of the Weaners track now. So we're going to be looking at the screen because we don't have a hard copy of this. So please bear with us.
Mm-hmm.
Are we weaners or workers? Peter and the author of Hebrews leave us with the unmistakable impression that most Christians in their immediate audience were still not weaned from the milk of mother. They could not yet be teachers, for they were still in a state of utter dependence. They could not be effective workers in the church, for they were still not wise. If they learned to walk with the wise, they might yet become wise workers. But if they continued unweaned, they risked even more than perpetual childhood.
As Paul sternly warns the Corinthians, who foolishly regarded themselves as spiritually wise, I could not speak to you as spiritual people, but as to carnal, as to babes in Christ. I fed you with milk and not solid food, for until now you were not able to receive it, and even now you are still not able, for you are still carnal. Carnal Christians, Paul goes on to warn, will inevitably be divided Christians, for they will always be followers, never leaders. And baby, carnal, dependent Christians can only be, at best, as wise, as pure, as stable, as fruitful as their teachers. On the other hand, as perpetual dependents, they can also be as deceived and duped as their teachers are.
In the 20 plus years since I left the Watchtower, and that would now be, of course, 30 plus years, I have been forced to acknowledge this stinging reality. The level of biblical literacy among Jehovah's Witnesses is actually higher than among Christians. Knowledge, of course, does not guarantee understanding, but without knowledge, understanding is impossible. The phenomenon one continually observes when looking at cults is paralleled in conservative churches. There is a generally high level of biblical literacy, knowledge of names and facts, but a leveling off, an upper limit of learning which stands in marked contrast to mainstream Christianity. This upper limit, almost inevitable for the non-professional, acts as an impenetrable ceiling, effectively rendering invisible the attic above, where Christian scholars labor unknown to most of us below. In cults, this ignorance is understandable. The arrogance with which often accompanies little knowledge is indeed dangerous. Cultists may be excused, though, for believing that no one knows better than they do. They have never likely been exposed to Christian scholars. The same, unfortunately, is also true of millions of conservative Christians, but with much less excuse.
True, in mainline churches, the average level of Bible literacy is notably lower than evangelical and fundamentalist churches. Yet, conversely, the scholarship of leadership is dramatically higher. Indeed, the highest levels of sophistication in Old and New Testament scholarship are almost a monopoly of older denominations, where university standards have been the norm for many generations. In contrast, evangelical scholarship is a recent phenomenon.
Now, the next section is entitled Testing Our Bible Understanding, and you might find this a bit of a challenge, so we'll try to go over it once or twice.
Yeah.
And show how you might be able to use this chart to evaluate where you are in terms of Bible literacy. Testing our Bible understanding. These general observations setting the stage, we can begin to be more specific as to our personal progress on the learning curve of Christian discipleship. The chart below is an attempt to compare the biblical literacy levels of Christians, cultists, and non-believers. On a scale of 10, where would you place yourself on the learning curve? Now here we have a chart. Now you'll be able to get this chart later, by the way. We'll put it on the we'll put it a note as to where you can find it in our website.
After the next one, though?
I think after the next one.
Yeah.
Got a
So
ways to go
we'll
first.
finish reading it, and then we'll give you
We'll post it
the
or
link.
show you where to get it.
Mm-hmm.
Are you a Weaner, a worker, or a wise guy? Now there's levels. Here the only levels covered in the chart are from 4 to 10.
Mm-hmm.
And here's what a 10 would sound like. Now this is based upon our knowledge because we were in the book business and met all kinds of seminarians and students and ministers and teachers at seminaries during our days in the office of our bookshop. And this is what we base these levels on. A 10 would be a published, translated biblical exegete. Today, he would probably be a PhD, or at least a DD. In the older generations, you just had Masters of Divinity and Doctors of Divinity, so you didn't have the PhD level. That's a function of modern, you might say, specialization. So today you can be a PhD in one Bible book, or one writer of the Bible, like John or Luke. So these men would be translated biblical exegetes. That is, they're published in journals, but also in book form, and they're generally teaching at world-class universities or seminaries. Their authority transcends even denominational ties. Nowadays, they're likely to be specialists. I just said that they might be John or Luke specialists, Matthew specialists, universally recognized scholars. It does not mean, however, because they're universally recognized, that they would be honored by anti-intellectual groups, including Christian fundamentalists. A 9 on the scale would be a theologian or an exegete, and he would have at least Greek skill and facility, probably some Hebrew proficiency as well. He would probably teach at a denominational seminary, so he would not be the type who would transcend denominational boundaries. Not the type level, it would be a better word. He would perhaps be published, though, by his parochial, that is, denominational sources. He might be a DD or a THD or a THM, perhaps a PhD in some circles. 8 would be somebody would have seminary training generally, but he would be totally dependent on a 9 or a 10 for specifics. Most pastors would be at this level. They'd be an MA or a Master of Divinity. Many evangelists, famous ones like Billy Graham and Charles Colson, would be at this 8 level. Most popular apologists, cult experts so-called, will have attained proficiency in the New Testament, Old Testament introduction, and maybe in church history too. A 7 would be some pastors, mostly fundamentalists, or well-read laymen. They might have a BA, but they wouldn't have any of these specialized seminary training degrees. TV evangelists, for the most part, I would put at a 7 level. Even cultists and unbelievers can sometimes be a 7 or even an 8 in Bible knowledge. That is proof texting. But the biggest difference from an 8, that is between a 7 and an 8, would be you don't know what you don't know, or even that you don't know. You're not in touch with 9 and 10. 9 and 10, that's why you don't know what you don't know. Generally, you're dependent on some pet teachers, and if keen on personal research, you're probably addicted to internet sources rather than accredited teachers. What would a 6 be? That would be many evangelical laymen. They would have a general knowledge of Bible history and doctrine. They might even be used in their churches as Sunday school teachers, for example, or even Sunday school superintendents. But they read little. Thus, they're totally dependent on pastors and or secondhand information. A 5 would be somebody, probably most churchgoers in mainstream denominations, little specific knowledge of names, places, and dates, and they're often confused as to theology. That is, they can't distinguish sources where they learned something. Was it from the Word of God, or was it from the world that they learned these things? And a 4 would be most unbelievers. They know some facts, but they know more misinformation. Unfortunately, as with 5 and 6, they'll be blown about by every wind of doctrine. So where would you put yourself?
Well, I think for me, I can't be 8 because it's talking about seminary training.
Usually.
Yeah, usually, okay. So I guess I'd be maybe in the 7.5 department, because 7 said that you'd be well read.
And maybe a cult expert would be in this,
Yeah.
somewhere between 7 and 8.
Yeah. So, there's a little bit of mix in there, so 7.25, 7.5.
Now, I can't place myself higher than 8 to 8.5 because I don't have any seminary training.
Yeah.
And I therefore don't have any specific knowledge, although I have a taste of Greek and Hebrew. I'm not trained in those, so I will never be able to teach in a seminary.
Yeah.
Although sometimes it's interesting that cult experts get invited in because they're specialists.
Yeah. Yeah.
So where would you put yourself in this on this scale? Now, if you do have any doubts about it, there's hope.
I think it's good to get to the point where you know what you don't know. That if you can get to that level, you're in a good place, because then you will always bow to the knowledge of people who actually know what they're talking about.
Yes, you'll probably never get beyond 7 if you don't know what you don't know.
Yeah.
And where to get it.
People in those lower categories oftentimes talk as if they're in the 9-10 department.
So next time we want to look at a test you can give yourself. It's only 3 questions, but it's a test that has to, if you're foggy at all as to where you stand on here, this will definitely separate the wheat from the chaff when it comes to teaching. So tune in next time for testing yourself as to whether you are a Weaner, a worker, or a wise guy. See you next time.